Hello everyone. Welcome to the Audacity to Emote, our second episode. And for this episode, we have a very special guest, Jessica Rajko. I did say your last name right?
You did, yeah, thank you.
Yes. She is the assistant professor or an assistant professor of dance here at Wayne State University, specializing in big data.
Mm, yeah.
We're going to get into that in a little bit, but just say hi to the people.
Hello, everybody.
I
Pleasure to
wanted to point out
be
this
with you.
great, awesome. Hold on, let me move the mic. Warriors Wayne State sweatshirt. I have this thing where I really dislike school paraphernalia in general, but this was pretty cool.
It is a nice one.
So, so let's start off with the cool stuff that you're doing right now this year in the fall of 2020, uh, and slash spring of 2021 or winter, I think is what we call it.
Mhm.
With the OnSite Insight Dance Festival. Tell
Yeah.
me, tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So, OnSite Insight Dance Festival is going to be the culminating project of a class that we built specifically for this semester called the Virtual Dance Collaboratory. It's working within the dance company model. And we decided to develop this class as a response to the fact that we're all in this remote environment, teaching mostly online, and we're going through a mass pandemic. Students are experiencing and participating in Black Lives Matter protests, and we're all sort of grappling with these radical shifts that are happening on multiple levels. And we just wanted a space where students could come and talk and make work that thought about those things and gave them space to process their own experience. And also kind of critically reflect on what's happening in the field, um, rather than just sort of let that happen later. So knowing that our students are going to be the ones going out in the field and experiencing and also changing the field based on some of the things that are happening now, we wanted to give them space to do that. So all of that work that we're doing through the semester will culminate in the OnSite Insight Dance Festival. And what that it looks like exactly, we're not sure because we're still making it. And we're really trying to keep it student driven so that as they're coming into these ideas, right now we're looking at a lot of different online platforms, different ways of making media content, different movements that are happening within our own field in response to this sort of predominantly virtual environment that we find ourselves sharing and
Mhm.
sharing and being in. So from that, we're going to culminate that in a festival that will be virtual. But what format and how we do that, how formal it feels like a concert versus something maybe with conversation like we're doing today, we haven't decided. So it's really exciting and it's really student driven. And we're thrilled to have this opportunity to be responsive in the moment and give students a platform to share their experiences.
What so what are some of the biggest obstacles to this new virtual online format that everyone has to move to thanks to COVID? Like what sorts of things have you faced as far as like teaching and trying to communicate performance critiques or what have you through this new tech, this new paradigm?
Hmm. I think that's a really great question. You know, I want to just right away say, yes, we all know that these systems, like getting used to a new online platform is very clunky and takes time, right? Like learning the nuances of Zoom, which is where we do a lot of our teaching, and getting sort of the choreography of how to work that system. We all know that's really complicated and we're having to do so rapidly. So setting aside the technical elements, I think the hardest thing so far has been the sort of the lack of physical interaction or that sense of being in space with each other, being in shared space, having community that is coexisting in the same location. I think that is so deeply a part of how we understand our dance practice is being in community with other people in space and time.
Mm.
And when we lose, like when we lose that sort of that connectivity of being in proximity to other people, it's hard to replicate that in these spaces. The three dimensionality gets sort of lost, right? Being able to feel the nonverbal cueing of people and reading a room, like non-verbally reading a room is harder, especially because I'm teaching two classes that are a bit larger. And so I have two screens of people. And so I have to like, if I'm going to feel the whole room, I have to like toggle back and forth. That's strange.
Yeah.
I think also just on our bodies of this sort of like ever frontal facing is something that in dance we really work to undo, because a lot of our experiences in the world ask for that because of so much of our sensory system being sort of frontal facing.
Wow, I never
We
thought
do,
about that.
yeah, we do a lot of work to feel our backspace, and this sort of being the screen-based environment really reinforces a frontal facing that it's like now we're having to do extra effort to kind of like feel our own three-dimensionality. So
Mhm.
just things like that, I think it really has to do with community, it has to do with physicality, it has to do with those things being of value, and feeling how we're having to like do a bit of extra labor and work to make that present in these spaces that don't necessarily want to or weren't built to afford those things.
Gotcha, gotcha. Wow, this
Yeah.
it's so many logistical things that you just don't
Yeah.
I wouldn't think about, like, until you have to do it, and yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I know that we are in the very beginning stages of our semester and whatnot, but when do you have any idea of when the festival is actually going to take place? Roughly, not like specifically.
Yeah, roughly we're looking at the end of the semester.
Oh, okay.
Probably within the first 2 weeks of December. Just sort of, and which is around when we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, was typically when our winter dance, our December dance concert would be. So we're
Um,
looking around that time, knowing that we're building all of the content through the semester. We kind of put it towards the end. And we have a lot of other things we'll be doing in the winter that will be potentially, pandemic permitting, will be more hybrid, but we knew this was something that we could definitely do in this moment to I think I feel like it's really for the students to feel like they have this opportunity to be able to express and share, and try out different ways of doing that that aren't in the sort of live concert arena. I think it's important for them to have that experience, and we've actually had a lot of deep interest in screen dance in this program. I've been here about a year, and that's been like a recurring theme of student
mhm.
interest. So it's exciting to have this place where we can kind of centralize those ideas.
So, in at the end of the semester, what could audiences expect to see from the students at the festival? How open or how broad is what
Ooh.
might come out of their work in class?
I really think that's a really great question that I will give a really broad answer to, because we are still in the phase of content exploration. And so they're just about to transition into some of their own ideating. But
Mhm,
some things that to know about the class is we have 29 fantastic, amazing students in this class. So it's quite large. And in that, we'll be building small groups that they get to work with remotely to build their content. We did a survey. Allison McCall and I did a survey. We're co-teaching the class. We did a survey at the beginning of the semester to see what student interest was, and we by and large had a lot of students who were very interested in screen dance. So again, coming back to that, so I think we're going to see
mhm,
a lot of students exploring issues of the pandemic, issues of systemic racism, issues of personal isolation. Um, I think we're going to see some absurdity. I think we're going to see students. This has come up a lot in our conversation: is how do we create spaces of healing and joy in response? Not in addition to having these critical discussions that are really important in this moment. So I think we'll see sort of a really interesting narrative arc through the content that we have. We're also in addition to this screen dance work and this creative outpouring that we're going to have from our class, part of what we're doing is also capturing the stories and narratives and conversations that are happening throughout our department. And this was really important for us, is to say, if this is so fundamentally different than how we operate, and how are students experiencing that, and how is that important to our history as a program, to our history as people going through this collectively. How do we capture that, and can we also bring that to the festival, so that we're doing that storytelling of what it means, and sort of commemorating a semester where we all collectively had to work in sort of isolation, and how we
Mhm.
process that. So I think it's that storytelling component, not just of the students in our class, but the department more broadly, is really important as well.
I think it's so amazing that this, in a weird way, it's hard to say that anything related to this pandemic is amazing. It feels like bad, but I think it's amazing that this moment in time, and also this work that you're doing with the students ties so directly into your history and what you're a really fascinating person. And I want kind of want to like I want the audience to know more about you. So first I have a question.
Sure.
What is the origin of your last name?
Raiko,
Yeah.
I was married into that name. My husband Stjepan is Croatian. He grew up in Croatia,
Ah.
and then came here as a high school exchange student and has stayed since. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
my maiden name is Mumford, and a lot of my family's is Welsh. So I have that. That's the other
Ah, okay.
trajectory.
So do you
Mhm.
just like love Mumford and Sons? Is that like
I my last name changed right before they became popular, and I could not be happier. I just
I gotcha. I gotcha. So when did you first develop an interest in dance?
Oh, early. I've been dancing since I was 3. I feel like that's so cliche, but it's true. I've been dancing since I was really young. Um, and I think it was one of those things where I realized I'm kind of a split brain, because I do the tech stuff too, and so
Mhm.
I'm really analytically driven, but I'm also very kinesthetic. And I for me, those two kind of have to go hand in hand, which is sort of a funky blend, but
Yeah.
I understand the analytics, and I understand what I do in the tech side through the physicality of experiencing it and doing the work. Like you're talking about, you just have to do like the doing of the things.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like really, really hard to not dance. But also, so I've been fascinated with like research methods and different forms of analytics for a really long time. So I've been really fascinated with a blend of those two things ever since high school.
Ah, since high
So
school.
I think it's in some ways I feel like I've been this sort of dance science or dance tech hybrid for like much longer than my more professional career, and that's always
Mhm.
been a fascination of mine.
The
So
world of dance is a fascinating, like, and kind of foreign place to me, but I imagine it's much like the performing arts. So, as you were growing up, did you were you taking dance lessons like since you were young, or did you start when you were in high school? Or
I did gymnastics for a few years, and then I started like more specifically dancing when I was 6. So I think I was taking like I was dabbling, I don't remember completely, but I think I was doing a bit of both from 3 to 6, and then moved like exclusively into dance when I was 6. And I like many fellow Michiganders, because I am originally from Michigan, grew up in a private competition studio. I did some other
Mm,
things too, but I was part of that studio circuit, and did a lot of competition dance, which have had a wide range of experiences in that environment. And some of
I
them
can
were great,
imagine.
and some of them not so much. And I think that a lot of people who grew up in that environment have had a range of experiences that can be really, really lovely, and sometimes not so much.
How important do you think those experiences as a young dancer, as far as having um, I don't do you call them lessons, or having lessons?
Yeah. Mhm. Lessons, yeah.
How important was that? Do you think to sustaining your interest in dance
Oh,
um, through
huge.
college?
Well, here's a funny story. So I didn't dance like officially dance my senior year. And part of that was because my later experiences in the competition environment were less great. I was starting to get a lot of anxiety. I was in a very competitive studio. We did, for those who know the field, we did nationals every year. We traveled for major competitions, and we were usually at the top, and it was a lot of pressure. And I think by the time I hit my junior year, I felt like I was more afraid of dancing because of the pressure of the environment than I was enjoying it. So I decided to not dance my senior year. And I think that year away is actually what kept me in dance, because
Mm.
I had some time to sort of like be away from that culture and like think about like what it was about dancing that I loved, and how much of that had to do or didn't have to do with the environment that I was dancing in at the time. And then when I went to college, I was actually going to go for pre-med and then just
That was going to be my
dancing
next
on the
question, was
side.
if you knew
Huh?
that. That was actually going to be my next question, was if you knew, even as you took that year off in your senior year, that you wanted to pursue a career in dance, or if you were you still
I
weighing your
didn't.
options.
I was actually like, I'm gonna go be a doctor. I loved anatomy. I still love anatomy. I was really interested in, again, the sciences aspect of it. So I was gonna do pre med, and I was gonna like dance on the side. I ended up going to Hope College, where I could do a double major, and they have a lot of programs where double majors are sort of, because it's a very very tiny private school. So
Yes, I do know.
double majoring there was a little easier. So I was going to do that. And then I was just like, I fell in love with dance again, because I wasn't in a competition environment and I got to dance for myself. And like that really felt like the first time that I could remember where I was dancing for myself, and
Ah,
dancing not for a point system. And that was a really important moment for me, to separate competition from the act and the practice of dancing.
right.
That was a big deal for me, and I realized how much the sort of like the goal setting of a competition environment was really impacting my experience of the dance practice itself. And so then I ended up pursuing dance a bit more seriously, but ended up doing a double major in psychology instead, and got really fascinated with research science. I was really interested in research psychology. And
Yeah.
so that's when I got like, oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many possibilities of bringing these worlds together. And that's what I've been doing since, and mostly with tech. And I can talk about that too if you'd like. But I think it was mostly the research science component I was really fascinated with, and thinking about how dance and dance knowledge could bring something different to that arena, that
Mhm.
just a different perspective that I felt like was really important, because I felt like so much of what I was learning in dance wasn't just how to dance, but how to be in like sort of like celebrate and be in my own body, and like be aware of the world through a sort of more multisensory experience. And to think real, I think I talk about thinking relationally. So thinking about connections of things as opposed to
Mhm.
things in separation or modules. And science is so much about cutting and taxonomies and categorizing and all of this. And so dance for me allowed me to see those relationships across those things that were oftentimes being divvied up, just as a way of like being as a dancer. And so for me, the two kind of balanced each other out. I'm a Libra, so that was
Yeah.
apparently really important.
You
But
know, I think it's really interesting that that idea of separating the kind of sportsmanship from the arts, because I think in all the fine arts, there's a very similar thing. Not that fine arts is a sport, but there's a because of the field is so saturated, because I think these competitive environments just kind of naturally develop around performing and artistic endeavors in general. And sometimes, for I can speak just, well, at least from my own experience, like in music,
mhm,
at a point it becomes very hard to distinct distinguish the difference between the sport, the sportsmanship part of the art, and the
mhm,
wanting to be the best, and
yeah,
the actual love of the art and respecting the art for
mhm,
the art, like for it on its own merit.
yeah.
So that's really interesting. um I wanted to ask you about where you're from, though. So you were born and raised in Kalamazoo, right?
Yes, I was.
And then you went to Hope for undergrad.
Yes, I did.
That's I was gonna ask, did they have the Kalamazoo Promise when you were
Uh, I'm aging myself. I was before that time.
okay. I was wondering. I was like, I'm surprised you didn't go to Richmond. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That is a great program for those that don't know.
Yeah.
Kalamazoo offers they will pay for your college education um at it, I think it's at any Michigan college.
As far
If
as I
you
know, I don't know if it has to be a state school or not. I don't remember.
I think so. I think it does have to be a state school,
I'm
and if
pretty
you have
sure.
to
Yeah.
attend Kalamazoo schools from, like, I don't know, first grade or something, first through 12, I think,
Yeah.
or something like that. It's a great program if you live in Kalamazoo.
Mhm.
Pretty awesome.
It's done a lot of good works for the city too, in terms of part of it's about retention and keeping people regional, and I think that's really
Yeah, absolutely. So you've kind of had these. I went to school on the west side as well,
good.
in
Mhm.
like near Grand Rapids, and I
Mhm.
feel like okay, let me rewind a little bit. So I went to Tallahassee first, to a historically
Okay.
black college called Florida A&M University,
Mm.
right? It's 18 hours away from my home, and I
Mhm.
experienced no culture shock. Really, I mean, I went to my school was probably 90% black, 92% black, and
Yeah.
the same was virtually true for FAMU. So when I went there, it was very much like my high school experience. No culture shock at all, even though there was all these people from, because FAMU is one of those places where most of the people who go there aren't from Florida.
Mhm.
They're from Chicago and LA and Washington, DC, and um, but I experienced no culture shock. But when I went to Grand Valley in
Oh,
Grand Rapids, it was like a whole nother slice of Americana that I had not ever encountered.
yeah.
We're talking a population that's the literal the opposite reverse. I think it was 90% white and
Oh, yeah.
10% other. So it was just a very uh so I'm curious for you, from having lived on the west side of the state
Yeah.
and now living here in the Detroit metro area on the east
Yeah.
side, what are some of the differences that you've experienced between those two places? And also, how how has it affected you artistically and like creatively? And the same for Arizona. Throw Arizona in the mix too. So
Well,
what's
and I
going on?
wanted to do that because I feel like it's so deeply embedded into who I am as an artist. Like, and my artistic identity is really tethered to Phoenix, I would say more so than the west side of Michigan. So because I moved to Phoenix a year after graduating undergrad. So I was there for 13 years. So I feel like most of my artistic career has been developed in community with people in Phoenix. But I would say, like, in a hypothetical world where that didn't happen, I think, yeah, the culture shock. It's very sort of, when we think of, how am I going to say this? When we think of, like, sort of the sort of cookie cutter white Americana of the Midwest, I feel like that by and large feels very similar to being in the west side of Michigan. It's pretty racially homogeneously white, and it has, like, even in as quote unquote mid-sized city like Kalamazoo, you do have a certain rural appeal, and I think it's because a lot of the city is still by and large supported by suburbs, and suburbs that exist in farm country. So
Mm,
you do, it's like you move just outside of the borders of Kalamazoo and you're like literally in farm country. So it has, and I feel like that is sort of the Midwest in a sort of like the white Americana part of the Midwest. And it's really, I think about my experience growing up. I had a lovely experience. I could run around, and, like, I got to, like, go into the woods and be like my country girl self. And then, but was, like, surrounded by predominantly white kids. And I think moving to Phoenix was sort of my first experience being in a more racially diverse space. And there's a lot of baggage with Phoenix in terms of its relationship to racial politics, but I felt like there was a space where people were grappling with that and doing so collectively, and that became a big part of how I feel like my experience transitioned into sort of thinking about advocacy and thinking about critical explorations of my work in relationship to identity politics around things like race and place, being in a
Mhm.
border city, right? So like it's pretty close to the border. We have a lot of border politics in Arizona, so it's I would say that the dynamics there are more around issues of Mexican American um, border issues, also around Latinx racial identity, like and the way that that sort of navigates place and space. So it's different, and it's different in Detroit, right? Like it's a different
Mm.
feel. But I think there's something also about the sort of like the I'm bringing in Phoenix again because there's something about the way that Detroit is seen in our country and the way that Phoenix is seen in our country as these sort
Mhm.
of um, islands, these sort of cultural islands that are not on a coast, that are not Chicago. They feel like they're their own sort of like pod of culture, and sometimes it's hard, I think, to sort of like permeate that bubble, or it feels like it's hard to permeate that bubble. And I think that can be that sort of makes this sort of interesting geographic identity where people really deeply feel connected to that location, but
Yeah.
sometimes in tension with other cities that are more nationally recognized as um, laying the groundwork for how we nationally identify our art scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So those social, cultural, and political aspects, you think have had an effect on you, just
Yeah.
like with the different locales.
Oh yeah, and I think it's so I bring in the geography as well as like issues of spaces that are Phoenix is in many ways one of those cities that's really quickly transitioning to being I would say majority non-white,
Hmm.
predominantly Latinx. And I think, Detroit being a historically Black city, I think there is those we feel those tensions in a very visceral way. And so that was very much present in the tension that that brings to specifically like institutions, right? Like academic institutions, and the way that an academic institution, because I was at Arizona State University prior to this, the way that those institutions interface with their regional location.
Mm.
I think it can be complicated, and I think particularly because we exist in cities that are not seen as part of the national dialogue all the time, and so there becomes this bifurcation of supporting regional and supporting national, where other spaces, city cultural centers might, those two things kind of blur and blend together in a different way. And I think that tension is really funny. I find it very bizarre,
Mhm.
but I think it's an ongoing dialogue across all of these systems that are interacting with each other.
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha. And because I know I don't want to go. We're going to go over our plan about that, but I don't want to go too far over. So I want to
Yeah.
get to your academic work, and I had some questions because I was reading your bio, and so here's what it says. You describe yourself as an interdisciplinary scholar, practitioner working at the intersection of somatically informed dance and human computer interaction design.
Hmm.
So, what is somatically informed dance?
Okay, so I think this is a way that those of us who sort of take a somatic approach. So somatics is a way of exploring the our relationship to our own body. So soma, the root word, means body, like mind, body, spirit together. So the idea that we're working against the idea of mind and body duality, Cartesian duality, for those who are like into that space, but the idea that mind and body are split. So we work a little bit
Cartesian duality? You
more
gotta break it down for us layman's.
yeah, so
Cartesian
we work
duality?
more holistically, and somatic practices, there's a wide range of them. Feldenkrais, Bartinia fundamentals, Alexander technique, all of these different practices were built as a way for people to use movement as a way to understand their own bodies, and
Mm,
relationship, and not just like my body physically, but like understand through our sort of own physiological kinesthetic vestibular sensations, like how we understand the world, and working sort of through bodies as a way to understand. Sometimes we use it in dance as a way for like cultivating our own dance practices, and it can be used towards health. A lot of these were built towards like helping people heal outside of Western constructs of medicine. Or in addition to, or in partnership with.
So
So
that word somatic means like body movement, like natural body informed dance. Is that
I
what it?
think for those of you who are familiar with like mindfulness and meditation, I would say it's like taking that instead of sort of focusing in on stillness as the goal is focusing in on movement practices and movement.
Ah, okay. That's a
Does that
good.
help?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
So yeah, so it's just these are just ways. So what happened is that these types of practices got folded into dance as a way to um, help body dancers sustain their practice and and be able to like work through their practice and not damage, right? So a lot of historically, especially in Euro concert dance and places like ballet, you were like, well, your career's over when you're hitting 27 or whatever it might be, because the purpose of the dance was, or like the perception was, that you just work your body through the form until it gives out and then you move on. Right, like that's like, we can think of sports do similar things,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You have
Absolutely.
a shelf life
Mhm.
as a practitioner. But what happened is as somatics got folded in, particularly through like modern dance, postmodern dance lineages of practices, is that we said, well, do we have to work that way? Like, do we
Mhm.
have to stop dancing when we're 27? Are there ways that we can fold in other practices of healing and health and bodily awareness that could help us sustain our careers? So
In our life,
that was
right?
some of the goals and efforts, but I think it's expanded since then to also be about a sort of a mindset of working. And when I talk about relationality, when I talk about seeing connection, I feel like that also comes from the somatically informed lens, or at least that's how it works for me, is that I get to sort of, if we're talking about body mind tethering, we're also talking about body mind place time, body mind place people. So we start to see the dynamics of how our sort of world operates in relation and feeling that really fluidly. And I think that's just really beautiful. Seeing the connection, seeing the invisible tissue between things rather than, again, seeing things as compartmentalized. It'd be nice if we had more of that.
Absolutely. I get, yeah. And there was something else I wanted to ask you about. Was one part of your bio says that you aspire to disrupt normative, or at least your research aspires to disrupt normative narratives of how we perform digital technology
Yeah.
and how digital technology performs us. And
Yes.
I was wondering if you could break that down for us, you know.
Sure. So now we're getting into some of the critical technology part of what I do, and that's been a lot of my research. I've been working in with technology in tech labs with computer scientists, engineers in these sort of more formal design lab spaces for about 15 years now, 15, 16 years. And through that process, got you know I've started to think about feminism, because one does when you're in these spaces for long periods of time. And I got really interested in returning to academia back in 2014. I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in a way that I feel like we can have that critical conversation. So I started doing a lot of work and collaborative work with some other colleagues in women and gender studies, digital humanities, uh, information sciences, and we were all kind of collectively looking at technologies through these lenses of practice that are oftentimes in tension with how technology is built. And so I think there's more and more awareness now that our systems of technology really deeply impact how we see ourselves and our world, and they are sort of structuring, particularly in this pandemic moment, they're structuring a lot of how our world operates as well. So I think I knowing a bit of the history of how those things developed, coming back to Cartesian dualism, some of these ideas, like if we think about Enlightenment era ideology, we talk about sort of the demographics, predominantly white, cis, Eurocentric men who get to make these systems and bring all of their ideology and philosophies and lived experience to making those systems. We know that they will inherently be biased towards those ways of knowing the world. And so a lot of what we do, and what I do with other colleagues, is look at how we break that apart and look at how we critique those systems, how we understand them, how we could. I use art making as a way to explore public exploration of what that means, and how, like, introducing people into these concepts through art making. Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of that I do is through the idea of, like, we perform. I think there's always this perception, this comes from human computer interaction, of like user interface. I'm the user, that's the interface. I interact with the interface. And we always have this perception of like, it's me working on that. But in that relational perspective, right, that comes from dance, we could say it's bidirectional. And how many of us feel that right now when we spend a huge portion of our day on screens? Like, how does that impact how we offload at the end of the day? How does it impact how we cook, how we sleep, how we interact with people, how we think about relationships? Like,
Yeah.
do we think about relationships, like, if you imagine in your mind, and this is not, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but like I found, for example, when I imagine in my mind having a conversation now, I imagine it through a Zoom screen, because that's how it's happening. Like, how does
Hmm.
that fundamentally changing the way I think about.
Like you said, yeah, it's bidirectional. We're not just outputting, we're also
Right.
inputting at all, at all times. And
Yeah,
that stamp of technology definitely we carry that with us in our bodies. Yeah.
yeah.
So that resonates with me.
And
That
I
resonates with me.
Can I say one thing about that too? Because I'm
Yeah.
just um, there's a movie that just came out on Netflix called Social Dilemma, and I think I think in many ways it's talking about these issues, and I think that's great. I also want to note, because it's becoming more part of the popular consciousness, that most of the work where this started was through the work of predominantly Black and Indigenous scholars, and so
Oh.
and a lot of women, and so I think we have to recognize that as we look and seek answers for the issues that we're arriving to right now, or that we're realizing are happening,
Mhm.
a lot of times we want to go back to the people that look familiar, which means the guys that made the problem to begin with, which is what Social Dilemma does. But I think we also have to recognize that a lot of the critical work that's been happening way before Google realized it was a problem, way before Amazon, people at Amazon realized what they did is maybe not the best, way before Facebook started to have a consciousness. Those people doing that work were not part of that system. And people have been talking about this for a long time. This
Yeah.
is new into the popular consciousness, but there have been people fighting that fight for a lot longer.
And that's why I said at the beginning, I think that this moment is it's amazing how much it connects with your specialty and research, because it's more relevant now than ever.
Yeah.
In my eyes at least.
Yeah.
Um, and for the people listening, we're gonna be wrapping this up soon. But I listened to your TEDx at ASU, and I thought that was a really eye opening discussion and performance example of where dance and technology meet. You do a great job of explaining it. So I want to tell people out there to just Google your name. It'll pop up, or you could go to Jessica's website. What is it? What is your website? I'm sorry, I don't have it.
JessicaRajko.com, first name, last
Boom.
name.com.
Simple.
Mhm.
Check it out. Check it out. It's definitely worth watching.
Thank you.
Um, that was really it. I know we went a little bit over, but this was a fantastic
It's
conversation.
fun.
You are delightful. Your
You're delightful.
energy is just uh uh what's the word when something just catches on easily? It's infectious. Yes.
Ooh, infectious. I like that. I'm gonna go with organic, but I like infectious. So
Both of them.
very
Both of those. So yes, thank you for blessing our vlog, the Audacity to Emote.
Mm,
And that's it.
all right.
We will see you guys next in 2 weeks. Peace.